All right. So we are going to hear from our last two guests, and before we get there, I do have some. I like to call it sort of the logistical information. So first of all, I know that each of you received. Our delegates received a book by Nala Ayed called "A Thousand Farewells," and I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to Nala. She is on our advisory board. It's a book that's written by the perspective of one woman journalist who has seen so much and been in so many places. And when I read it, I felt very inspired by her strength and her belief. And her understanding of so many different cultures, and that is why we actually thought every year we like to give a book, and this year I thought this was a very a smart book to give, and I hope that you'll all enjoy reading it. And to Nala, in the event that she's tuning in, thank you very much for being so generous by giving us these books. I'd also like to take the opportunity to remind the delegates and our guests that we really want to make sure that, as you heard from Jennifer and Nyardzai and Lakshmi and Kakenya, that awareness is the single biggest thing that we can all do together. So I think we do great work in terms of providing platforms. So please do use our hashtag Girls20Summit. We have Google+, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. There's absolutely no reason why you can't share your views. We want to hear them. We want our live audience to also share their views. I think it's really important that if we can cultivate this global conversation, which is what we've tried to do in partnership like people with like Girl Up, that we're not doing it ourselves. We're actually starting to mesh all the information. So now I'm very pleased to introduce and bring to the summit stage our final two guests. We've got Suzanne Petroni and Jeff Edmead. Jeff, please tell me how to say your name. Jeff Edmeadis?
Edmeads. Yeah.
Edmeads. Gosh, I got some of the African names right, and I couldn't get Jeff Edmeads. But Jeff Edmeads and Susan Petroni are with us from the International Center of Research on Women, and they're joining us from Washington. So welcome very much to the fourth Girls 20 Summit. We're all gathered here in Moscow. We've had a full day of talking about the eradication of child marriage, so our delegates are well versed on the statistics, like the 14.2 million. They know about some of the initiatives that are taking place. They've heard from Lakshmi, Kakenya, Nyardzai, and now we've just heard from Jennifer Buffett. So you guys are the final act. And really what I thought would be very important is we designed this day so that there would be a real holistic approach to understanding the issue and then being able to leave this issue and understand how these girls can either make a difference in their own communities, and some of our delegates were shocked, and rightly so, that child marriage actually does exist in their country. So what can they do now that they know that it actually exists? And then their mission here is to figure out what are they going to ask the G20 leaders to do. So I thought it was important that we hear from people who have been in the field, who've seen some of the programs, and then hear from you guys. You've done a lot of work, extensive work, research work, and you've seen how that research has played out. So, Suzanne, I'm gonna start with you. I'm gonna just quickly do an introduction of you, and then of Jeff, and then the floor is yours. So, Senior Director of Gender, Population and Development at the International Center for Research on Women. And I'll just stop there and say ICRW has been a partner since the beginning, where you lead the organization's research, advocacy, and programs on sexual and reproductive health and rights, adolescent transitions to adulthood, child marriage, and population dynamics. Jeff, I understand that you are a social demographer at ICRW, so you're going to have to explain that stuff to us and what exactly you do with your day, and that your research primarily focuses on fertility, contraceptive use, and migration. And all of these issues have come up today. So I'll turn it over to you guys. I know that you wanted to take the opportunity and explain what's going on at ICRW with respect to child marriage, and then we're going to go into questions. And just prepare yourselves. These delegates are now well versed on a lot of information, and they've asked some pretty tough questions today. So I don't think they'll hold back, knowing that you're the last two in the final act. So over to you.
Great. Well, pleasure to be with you all today. And I know we're coming to you at the end of a rather long day, and one in which you've been learning a lot about this. horrible practice of child marriage. And so what we want to do today is not get into the why child marriage is happening and how it's harmful. You've heard about that already today. You know that there are, as far as I said, the 14 plus million girls a year who are forced into child marriage. That's 39,000 a day, or 1 every 3 seconds. And you've probably heard that this comes with a range of outcomes that are really challenging, both to the individuals and to their societies, in terms of the impacts that it has on health and economic development, on gender equality, and on human rights. And so what we want to do is not tell you more about the problem. We want to help you understand that there are solutions, and there are programs that have been proven to work. So hopefully when you go back to your homes, whether you're going back and trying to get your governments to do more on these issues, or maybe creating new programs that can address these issues, whether it's in your own country or through your government's foreign aid and foreign policy, trying to get other countries to eradicate this practice, there are some solutions. So what we'll talk to you about is not only what some of those solutions are, but also how do we meet the needs of already married girls. This is a population that has been taken out of society and out of school, and really are among the most vulnerable individuals out there. So I'll talk to you today about how we can help prevent the practice, and then I'm going to turn to Jeff to talk about what works to meet the needs of these already married girls. So let me start on the side of prevention, and what you've probably heard today is that child marriage is caused by a range of different factors depending on the context and the country and the region in which it's taking place. So in some places it can be driven by cultural or religious factors. In other places it's due to assumed roles regarding gender or a lack of options for girls. It's very often driven by economic reasons. So poverty really as a factor driving families to marry girls early. And this is in some cases because a girl is only seen as another mouth to feed. So if the family can give that mouth to someone else to feed, the economic burden on them is lightened. Usually it's driven by a combination of these factors. And so when we think about what works to prevent child marriage, you really need to think about what is driving the practice in a particular community and a context. So that's really the first lesson, is that there is no one-size-fits-all program. And that's disappointing because we always would love to have an easy solution. But that said, there are some common factors that are behind programs that have been proven to work. And ICRW, my organization, a couple of years ago, looked at what some of these factors are. So we did a study of all of the child marriage programs that we could find out there to try to get a sense of what are some of the common driving factors behind it. And we produced this report called Solutions to End Child Marriage. And you can just go on Google and look up Solutions to End Child Marriage, ICRW, and you can download a free copy of this report. But I'm going to touch on some of the top line strategies and lessons that we learned. So first, we learned that there are generally 5 main strategies that programs, whether they're driven by NGOs or governments or other organizations, there are typically 5 programs that they're employing, or types of strategies. And the first one, and really the most prevalent one and the one that we've seen have the greatest impact, is empowering girls themselves, giving them information and skills and support networks to be able to advocate in their own right and on behalf of their peers. And I think you heard from Kekenya and Taya today the power of a girl when she has information and when she is connected and recognizes that there are other options available to her than marriage. She is then able to transform not only her own life, but she's able to go out to her family and her community and really have an impact on many others. So these programs that are empowering girls, they're really trying to give girls the training and the skills In many cases, it's simply a safe space to be able to join with other girls and network with other girls in their community that enables them to understand themselves better, understand their world, and the options that might be available to them. So what they're trying to do is minimize the isolation in society that girls often feel. And these can be in school or out of school, in the community. Sometimes they're with boys, very often it's just girls alone. So that's the first strategy, recognizing that girls themselves really are the key. When they're empowered, when they have the knowledge and they can change not only their attitudes and behaviors, they're able to transform the way that they're seen by their families and by their societies. And that's tremendous. But we also have to recognize that transforming societies, creating social change, this can't be a burden that girls alone face. Because very often they're not the ones who are deciding whether and when and whom to marry. So we also need to work with the parents and the families and the communities. And this is the second strategy that we have seen programs implement and do so successfully. And that is educating and mobilizing parents, families, and community members, enabling them to understand the value of the girl and to be able to change the environment that surrounds the girl. So again, it's recognizing that girls can make change, but only in the context of an environment that's supportive of change. So this second strategy, educating and mobilizing community and family members, is important, and it's probably necessary, but it's only important and necessary in the context of other changes that are happening. It's supportive of other strategies. The third strategy that we have seen programs effectively utilize is focusing on education. And here we're talking not just about access to education, it's also the quality of education and formal schooling in particular. Study after study, year after year, we've seen the importance of formal education as a way of preventing early marriage. We're not exactly sure of the causality, what the exact factor is in regard to formal schooling that enables it to act as a protective factor for girls, but we do know that when girls are in school, there is a strong association with prevention of child marriage. In fact, in some cases, girls who have secondary school education are up to 6 times less likely to be married than those girls who have little or no education. So a really strong connection. And, you know, it could be because when girls are in school, they're seen by society as children, and so they're seen as unmarriageable. It could be because there's something about what girls are learning in school, about their rights, about their options, about the world around them. They could be learning about professions that they could be engaging in other than being married. It could be that they're gaining skills that will help them become employed later on. And so they want to stay in school, and their families see an economic value to them staying in school. And it could be because they're around other girls, and these social networks allow them to gain skills in communicating with others and negotiating with others. And I think with Kekenya's story, you hear the importance of being able to communicate and express your thoughts and negotiate with others. So we need more research in terms of what works and why it works. But again, the causality here, the relationship between education and marriage is really strong. A fourth strategy that we've seen used is using economic incentives or support to families and the girls themselves to stay out of marriage. So again, recognizing that in very many situations, poverty is what's driving early marriage. The girl really not being seen as economically valuable by her family, but rather she's seen as a burden. This is a challenge. So we've seen programs that are providing economic support, and it could be in the form of cash transfers directly to the girl or her family if she stays in school or if she's not married at a certain age. or it could be in the form of life skills, livelihood skills to give her employability after she gets out of school, and that shows her and her family that she does have economic value. I'll give you just a couple of examples here of programs that have used economic incentives in this way. One is a program called Berhane Huwan in Ethiopia, where the family actually got a goat if the girl stayed in the program and she stayed in school and stayed unmarried through the 2 years of the program. They're now giving chickens because that's more economically sustainable than a goat, but the same idea that the girl herself, by being in this program, is bringing value to the family. Another example is a program in Afghanistan that provides economic opportunities and livelihoods to the girls. The fifth strategy, and the last one that we looked at in our study, is focusing on enhancing the policy and legal environment. So we know, going back almost 100 years, that governments started instituting laws that prohibit early marriage. They set an age of marriage. But we also know that these laws are not always implemented, or if they are, there are exceptions. So, for example, countries may have a law that says the girl can't be married before 18 unless her parents approve. And again, we know that in many of these cases, it's the parents that are actually driving the early marriage. So we need to both work on implementing existing laws on the books and changing, in some cases, the laws and policies, and ideally working at the community level on up to ensure that communities are advocating for these policy changes. Now, when we did this review of programs, we looked at child marriage prevention programs around the world, and we saw that, encouragingly, there are hundreds of programs that are geared to prevent child marriage. Unfortunately, there were only about 24 programs that had solid evaluations that really were able to document measurements of impact. So we were a bit limited in what we could find, and of course, when you look at legal and policy change, we know that it's important, but from a research perspective, it is hard to identify the unique impacts of these policy and legal changes. So that's the one strategy that we found that had the least number of evaluations. We need more research, of course, to show us more about what works and why. 24 is a good start, but again, we need investments in the type of research and evaluations that will enable us to scale up these types of programs. But the bottom line is, we have some pretty good ideas about what works. The most effective programs and interventions are those that work in combination. So ideally, focus on the girl, recognize her empowerment means so much, but also work with the families, work on education, provide economic incentives and opportunities. These are the types of programs, these multi-pronged, multi-sectoral programs that can work. So that's a highlight or a summary of what we found in terms of the solutions and the solutions to prevent child marriage. But what we want to do now is help you understand that there are some 70 million girls out there who are already married before the age of 18, and they are among the most vulnerable and the most isolated because they have been taken out of school and taken out of their community networks and often don't receive services and information. So my colleague Jeff is going to talk to you about one of the programs that he's been working on with ICRW that is trying to help meet the needs of these vulnerable adolescent girls.
That's great.
So over to Jeff.
Jeff, just before you start, I just want to just remind you guys that we have about 20 minutes, and I really would like to give the girls an opportunity to ask questions because you've just really loaded them up with lots of information, and I'd like to make sure that they have a chance to distill it. So I'm going to put the pressure on you a little bit to make sure that the comments are fulsome but brief.
Sure, I think I can manage that. I'll tell you the story of a project I'm working on right now in Ethiopia that I think illustrates a lot of these points very well. So the project works in the Amhara region of Ethiopia, which has one of the highest rates of child marriage in the world. So half of girls are married by the time they're 15, roughly, and almost all of them are married by the time they're 18. It's a very socially conservative place. It's a place where girls really don't have a lot of economic opportunities. It's a poor rural area, so no one has great economic opportunities there. But what we've seen is that in this project is implemented by one of our large NGO partners, Care International. And the idea there is they're working to bring girls together and give them economic empowerment training and training around their health while they're working with their communities. And so what they do is they've organized these girls into groups, small groups of 10 to 20 girls who meet every couple weeks. And they talk about different issues in their lives. They get training on economic empowerment issues, that small things like learning how to save money formally, learning about taking loans, learning basic financial literacy. And then on the other side, there's issues around basic sexual and reproductive health, which it seems like these are simple things, but we're asking, we train certain groups of these girls who go out there and act as peer educators, so they have to go back into their communities and talk about these things with the girls. And the interesting thing is that the social environment that these girls live in is really challenging, but it's not unique to Ethiopia. This is what married girls often have to live with across the world. So if you can imagine the situation of a 13, 14-year-old girl who's been promised in marriage by her family, she may not even know that this has happened, because early marriage before 18 in Ethiopia is illegal, but still happens at a very high rate because the communities value it. They see it as a way of building ties between communities and between different families, and they really do see this as the best thing for their girls. The model that they aspire to in terms of what girls can and should do with their lives is really focused around motherhood, among being a good wife, very, very narrow, if you will, ideas of what women can and should be able to do with their lives. And that's reflected in the sense that this is what parents want for their children. They really do think that it's best for their children, and that's one of the reasons why you see so much of the child marriage. And I think it's important, thinking along those lines, it is important to remember that even though parents are arranging marriages for their children, and these are very much children, it's not because they don't love them. Parents love their children everywhere, and they want the best for them. The issue is when they're going forward and thinking of what is best for them, they're thinking within a very narrow range. They're thinking about them being mothers, them being a husband. They need a husband in order to survive, to have stability, and all these other things that factor into that area. So what you have there is a real issue around how do you change that dynamic a little bit? How do you move things so that girls have more opportunities? And married girls are a particularly vulnerable group, as Suzanne was mentioning, in that usually they go and they live with their husbands. So you move them away from their home, away from their friends. Usually at that point they're also dropping out of school because they're moving. And so they're not in the school system. They're not allowed to leave the home because they're seen as this very vulnerable girl that needs to be protected from the community in general. So they're very, very isolated. The other thing that we've found is that they're not just isolated at that level, but they don't know their husbands. Their husbands aren't their friends. Their husbands are often, in this case, about 8 years older. They have very different interests. And what we found was around a quarter of them never talk to their husbands about what happened in their day. They don't talk about what their feelings and hopes are. They don't talk about how to make decisions about money. So they really are very much alone in their new place where they go to live. So they're a very vulnerable group, and they fall through the cracks of all the government support systems that you can imagine because they're not in school, they're not really using the health system, so they're very isolated. So one of the cool things about this project is that it brings them together, it puts them into groups, it gives them community visibility, so the community knows who they are, because one of the first steps in this engagement was to really go and work very closely with the community, highlight the issue of we're going to be working with these young girls, and we asked the community to nominate married girls to come forward, and again, this is pretty sensitive given that it's illegal for them to actually be married. And we asked them to really play a role in shaping how this project worked out. One of the key things that they did was to pick community members to serve on a sort of a committee. And those committee members received their own curriculum that talked about gender roles and really challenged them in terms of think about yourself, think about where your role is, think of how you contribute towards child marriage. What we've seen there is that once you start to talk to people and you give them the information, child marriage causes, it leads to at least very much of the challenges of early pregnancy, health concerns, all those kind of things. People start to change their minds. They don't want bad things to happen to the girls in their communities or to their daughters or to their sisters. Nobody wants that. They just haven't challenged themselves in that way as yet. What we've seen there is we've seen incredible changes in the girls themselves. They're getting new training, they're out doing really cool things, and real shifts in self-confidence and awareness, and real shifts in some of the mental health measures that we looked at. A feeling of isolation really matters for these girls. I mean, one of the reasons that they love going to school is that that's where their friends are. And when they're not in school, they don't have access to their friends. And because they're not allowed to walk around freely, they can't just go and visit their neighbors without permission. So the mental health piece of this is really quite impressive. And I will say one of the things that is really good about this is we're giving concrete knowledge. So we're seeing really big shifts in use of contraception, big shifts in use of health services like antenatal care and those kind of things. But really, I think one of the more exciting pieces is we're seeing big changes in women's communication with their husbands. So one of the components of it was to give them negotiation skills. So we were giving them negotiation skills about use of health or ability to go work, those kind of things. What we found was that as soon as they had a system for discussing things with their husband and his family, that really helped them, gave them confidence to ask for things like maybe I could go back to school or maybe I could set up a little store. And it wasn't necessarily that the husbands were opposed to that, just they'd never talked about it. So we're seeing some really significant shifts at the individual girl and household level. And the other really interesting and fun thing about this project, I think, is that we saw some really distinct changes at the community level. So these community members who we had picked to be on the committees, they had to visit 5 households of participant girls every month and check in on how things were going. And that really highlighted for them the issues of child marriage and how bad it was. And they've become really strong advocates for preventing child marriage, and they've gone in and prevented marriages that were arranged and worked inside the community. So what you have is a very grassroots, organic approach where they're resisting child marriage from within. And what you have there is something that's much more sustainable. If we come in and we say, child marriage is bad, you shouldn't be doing it, it won't work. I mean, that's what we're finding, is that this combination of effects, I think as Suzanne had mentioned, is really where the successful programs are. I think one of the fun things, just to wrap up really quickly, of this project is even though it wasn't supposed to be about preventing child marriage, it's really about trying to help girls get past some of the really bad side effects of child marriage. Even with that, we found that it had a very strong prevention effect as well. So a program can meet both of those goals. And I think one of the things that I really would like to finish with is you can make a huge difference in the lives of girls with a relatively small input. We worked with these girls for just 1 year, and they met twice a month. And the changes were just amazing in the girls themselves. Now we're starting to see some of the actual research evaluation results come out, but the cool thing about this is that it is possible to make a big difference. You know, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by all these numbers, but it is possible to change them. It's possible for individual girls, it's possible within households and communities, and I think it's very much possible at the national level. So don't lose hope. It's tough to deal with a whole day of these statistics and numbers, and this is a very difficult issue. You should be angry about it. It's not something that we should be sitting by and watching happen. And there are real ways to accomplish that change.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think in particular giving us the background research and then showing us an example of how you actually take your research and then ensure that what you learn actually does make an impact. I'm going to go to the delegates for some questions. We only have about 12 to 15 minutes, and I've got about 4 or 5 hands. So again, I'm going to ask, you went through some media training. We're going to put that to use. So delegates, who's got the microphone? All right, whoever's got the microphone, go ahead, because we're going to try to get to all of you. And the way you do that is to help each other out by making your questions very short.
It'll be short. Hi, I'm Violette, and I represent France. I just had a question. Because most of the programs who help early child marriage are usually programs that begin in America or in Europe, but not in the region concerned or in the country concerned, how do you kind of avoid this? And I think Farah talked about this earlier. How do you kind of make sure you avoid this idea of the West helping third world countries, walking in their communities, their village, and being like, oh, what you're doing is wrong, but here's what you should do. And I'm just wondering how you make sure you avoid this kind of culturally related issue.
Are we going to take the questions all at one time, or
No,
do you want us to answer them?
we kind of go one by one. So over to you guys to answer it, because then the pressure's on you to make your answer brief as well.
Okay. You want to start?
Yes, this is a big issue. We shouldn't be shy of what we think of. I mean, we do have ideas of what are universal rights. Most of the countries that we're talking about have signed international agreements saying that early marriage is a violation of rights. So I think we should start by saying we shouldn't be shy of that. But having said that, we'll only accomplish so much if we don't work from within communities. And I think ICRW's approach has always been to work with communities, not against them. And so that means going in, understanding where they're coming from, and working within that framework. And as I said, communities do want the best for the girls in their lives. They don't want bad things to happen to them. And so figuring out messages that work well within that. So keep your girl in school because it protects her, because it gives her skills, it gives her things that can help her later in life. It will help her be a better mother. It will increase her health. Those are the messages that we should be pushing, not something where it's like, all of you are pedophiles, or, you hear this language. It's not helpful in terms of how we work on the ground. So I do think that this is a really important question. I think it's something we all need to keep in mind as we work on it, and to find local partners who are really strong advocates. And they're there. They're just waiting to be found.
Great point.
Jeff said it all. In the interest of allowing you all to ask questions, I'll just leave it there.
Great, thank you. So who has the microphone? Ashani.
Hi, I'm Ashani and I'm from India. Since one of the important points of the summit is also jobs and investment for women, I was thinking when you give these financial trainings to women, how effective is it to actually get them to work first? Because a lot of times, if you look at statistics of different countries, especially in India, there are a lot of anomalies regarding like the data, because there's a lot of rate for literacy, but not actually women working in the workforce. So I would just like to know what are the barriers that are actually there to get women to workforce, and what are the ways to tackle those? Thank you.
Again, a really good question. And, none of these programs that we talked about, none of the strategies in isolation is going to have the impact that we want. Really, we need to work across a range of sectors and issues to ensure gender equality. And only when that happens will we be able to see significant social changes. So allowing women in the workplace and giving them opportunities at an equal level as men is certainly key. That said, starting with some basic, in some of these cases, even basic financial literacy and basic livelihood skills can open up doors to opportunities that didn't previously exist for some of these girls. But clearly we need to work in partnership with the economic sector and employment sectors and make sure that if the girls are trained, there are positions for them to move on to. One other thing, though, that we need to think about is, since we're talking about children, we're talking about girls under the age of 18, we don't necessarily want to create an environment where their economic opportunities outside of school are better than those if they stay in school, right? Because we don't want to encourage child labor. We want to encourage them to stay in school. So we need to balance all of these factors, the human rights base, the education base, the economic and employment base, and make sure that girls are given the information and the education and the skills they need to be able to contribute most powerfully and most efficiently to their economies.
Fantastic points.
I just have one thing with the married girls in particular. They're already out of school mostly. They have children. They're not most likely going back to school. And for them, the financial literacy pieces, the small things make a huge difference, because this allows them to have some money that they control and that they have some say over how it's spent, whether it's on their own health or the health of their children. So their little things can go a long way. I think we need to keep in mind that not all employment is in factories or houses. It can be selling petty trade to support your home.
Okay, who has the mic? Yes, Luca.
Hi, I'm Luca from Germany, and as you said, change is possible, and many of us want to change something. Where would you suggest us to start with that change on the topic when we go home to our communities?
Again, great questions. Wow. So, this depends on where you're coming from and where you feel your value is best placed and where you can add value. In the case of a country like Germany, your foreign aid is already supporting some work to prevent child marriage, and I would encourage you to go to your foreign ministry and encourage them to increase the support that they're giving, both through the foreign policy, working with other governments to raise child marriage as an issue, and the direct foreign assistance that they give. Make sure that they're supporting adolescent girls, whether it's through education or through some of the more direct interventions that we talked about today. They can play an important role on their own through the funding and the programs that they support and in partnership with other governments. So that would be my suggestion.
I think that's exactly right. But I would also just say, you are a young woman, and you can create networks of young women to support other young women and children. I think it's not just working at the government level, it's working with your friends and your colleagues and creating social movements for these issues. I think it's a very powerful tool, and I think you're the perfect group to do that with.
Before I go to Carmina and have her ask her question, it's funny, this is actually what a lot of our emphasis has been on, which is create those networks, create those movements. And I'm staring again at Girl Up because they came here to describe how do you actually do this. And I think that your comments are very well placed on this particular group of delegates because when you pass them in the hallways, they're not passive. They're very, as you can see, very active, and their ideas are starting to form in terms of who will be working with whom on what issue. So I think, you do have to have this balance. Carmina.
Hi, I'm Carmina. I'm the delegate for Japan, and my question is to do with the nature of research. So since both of you have basically dedicated your life to this field, you clearly have a personal investment in this issue. But when dealing with research, it's of course when presenting them to people who might not agree or might think differently, it's important to be objective. So I was wondering, how do you balance your heart with the sort of objective view of research?
Here's maybe where you get into social demography and explaining what it is.
Listen, I think the thing with research is that we try to be objective. That's the goal. So we let our findings speak for themselves. But that doesn't mean that we don't care. I mean, I care very, very deeply about these issues. But it's about asking the right questions and doing research in a very solid way that presents evidence that is very hard to refute. So when you come into an argument with someone who disagrees with you, who may be arguing that child marriage is a cultural phenomenon that's been there for a long time, that has no real negative repercussions for anyone, in fact, it may be positive for society, we can point them to some real facts and that you can't really dispute when you get down to it. I mean, it becomes an issue of belief or not belief. But we come armed with research. Research is a weapon for us in this discussion. It's what helps us fight this movement, and we can create our own tools here to really push this issue forward. And I think research is a really, really key piece of this because people respond to facts. People respond to evidence as they see it, and we can generate that. And I think we know what the situation is out there. When we're not afraid of finding things that don't fit with our worldview. That's what happens when you do research. But we don't think that that's going to happen. We know what we're doing. And the thing is, with the research is really an ally, and I think we need to invest much more in it because it's such a powerful tool. People can't argue very easily against it.
And I would just add that the governments around the world, including the local governments in many of the countries that you've heard about today, they want the evidence. They want to know what works. And our organization and others like us are producing that evidence. So I would say there are many more organizations and governments and individuals out there who value the evidence and want to use the evidence to impact policies and programs. So that's what we're here for.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question? Yes?
Yeah.
Please.
Hello, my name is Isabella. I'm representing Italy. Mine is more like a practical question. I wanted to know how do you choose the particular site to implement your projects? Is the project tailored on the site? Do you have samples? How does it work?
So again, as Jeff mentioned, we don't come into a community and impose anything. How we choose the sites is very often because the local organizations have expressed an interest in wanting to work on these issues. Frankly, it's also driven by where the donors are funding different programs. And there are certain countries like Ethiopia where the government is open to these programs and where international donors are wanting to invest. Other countries like India, I'll give you one example where the state of Haryana, India, instituted a conditional cash transfer program 18 years ago. When daughters were born, they gave the families of the daughter a small stipend and then said, if by the time this girl turns 18 she's not married, we will give her what's now the equivalent of $250. These girls are now turning 18, and ICRW has the great fortune of having support from the U.S. Agency for International Development to go in and assess the impacts of this program. So we're doing that now, and we'll have results by the end of the year. But in that case, you had a state government that was already committed 18 years ago to this program. You have the U.S. government that wants to know, does this type of intervention have an impact? And you have a research organization that is equipped to go in and do that work. So, it's a combination of factors: the local community, the openness of the government, and the funding.
Well, thank you both very much. We that concludes our session with you, Suzanne and Jeff. You've given them a lot of facts, figures, but not just research, but really a very practical way at looking at what they can do and how they can do it. So thank you very much for joining us from Washington. Very pleased to work with you, and please pass along my regards to Sarah, your fearless leader, who has placed this on the agenda for many years now. Thank you.
Thank you all.
So I think delegates, after today, it's crystal clear why there's a role for G20 leaders. There's a lot of overlap between the economics and the social and the political and what role they can play. I think there was an interesting reaction when Lakshmi said, in fact, it does exist in more countries than you think, so it may be a little bit closer to home than perhaps when you came in the room today. We had a lot of information on this issue. I think what you will find is when you go back home and you go to all these different websites and you start to Google all the people that spoke to you today, while we were presenting some of the recommendations to the G20 leaders through the Sherpa tomorrow, I think what you've heard from our panelists is that this is a work in progress and that we do have to continue to work on it. So there are different times at different places with different partners, and all that kind of stuff does have to come together. So that really does conclude our discussion on the eradication of child marriage. I'd really just like to wrap up our day by sharing with you and our audience live streaming that between now and this time tomorrow, the delegates will have prepared their communique for presentation to Russia's Sherpa, Ksenia Yudeva, and then they will have begun also to shape their own initiatives that they will put in place when they return home to empower girls and women in their own backyards, or how they will work together. We'll also ensure that they have some fun. I think that's a very important part of the puzzle, and that's going to be facilitated by the ambassador to Russia from Canada, Ambassador John Sloan. And so please know that when you leave this country, we'd like to hear your views on what was fantastic, what you really enjoyed. How can we engage delegates like yourselves more? I would also like to once again, and I won't list them all, but thank our amazing partners. We have a website. There's a particular place for our partners. That's important. I've said it many, many times. Summits like these do not happen unless we do have the right partners, just not partners, but the right partners. And of course, in particular, we've been here in the home of Google Moscow, taking over their space, running their electricity, eating their food. So thank you very much for hosting us. And the best part is that with anyone who knows Moscow knows that there's terrible traffic. So we've actually been able to walk from our hotel through Red Square and passing the Kremlin every day on our way to the Google office. As a result of the efforts of Workbay.net and MacroBlue, I'm really thrilled that this year we have such an incredible site that allows us in such quick time to provide those who are not able to be with us here or join us live stream with the videos from this last 2 days. I have been so impressed by the questions and the panelists that one of the things that and Coralie will laugh when she hears me say this, but I'm like, why can't we put these videos on right away? And this year we have the perfect combination of a partner in Workbay.net and MacroBlue. And because of that, I really do want to thank you for allowing us to make sure that these delegates are heard. They've got a lot to say. They say it well. And if we have a platform, then we're going to use it. So thank you very much to Workbay.net and MacroBlue. So, I get to stand up here at the podium, and my legs hurt because it's been a while. But I couldn't do this without an amazing team, and I really just want to take the opportunity to first thank my board of directors, the advisory group. You can see how engaged they are. We had Elaine yesterday stand up where I am today, really working it, and she brought her expertise, and she came all the way here. We have such a phenomenal group of people behind the Girls 20 Summit. And in particular, I want to say to my team, Athena, Coralie, I'm glad you guys are in the room this time. Amy, Leslie, and Isabella, thank you for being here in Russia. I see you running around like crazy. I ask you crazy things. I ask whoever I see first, and you guys all work it and make it look really easy. So I very much appreciate it, and I promise at some point you'll have some sleep. So thank you. A big, big round of applause to my team, please. So that's it. This officially concludes our Girls 20 Summit 2013 live stream portion of our summit. And personally, I'd just like to say thank you very much. We've had a really terrific couple of days. So spasiba and das vidanya.